Prepare yourself to enter a realm where each murmur may uncover a mystery, and every narrative opens a gateway to the wondrous. However, before we set off on this adventure, keep in mind, if you find delight in solving enigmas and venturing into the uncharted, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Your support helps us deliver more stories of this kind to you. Brace yourself to challenge your perception of reality. Are you prepared to start? Let's embark on this journey. Ever since I was a child, life on the road has always fascinated me. My father was a truck driver, and I grew up listening to his stories about long journeys, landscapes changing like scenes in a movie, and the people he met along the way. When I turned 23, I followed in his footsteps and became a truck driver myself. In the beginning, everything was an adventure. Each trip was a new story to tell. But there was one journey that changed everything, a journey that made me question reality and haunts me to this day. It was winter, and I had a delivery to make in a small town in the countryside. The fastest route went through an old, underused road. I knew the stories about this road, stories of missing truck drivers, strange apparitions, and unexplainable phenomena, but I never believed in those things. I was practical, a man of logic. So, I ignored the warnings and took the road. The night was incredibly dark, the moon hidden behind heavy clouds. I was a few hours into the journey, and the only thing breaking the monotony of the road was the sound of the engine and the occasional headlights of a car passing in the opposite direction. Around midnight, I noticed a figure on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was someone needing help. I slowed down and approached. That's when I realized something was wrong. The figure, which seemed to be a man, stood still, staring directly at my truck. His face was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel his penetrating gaze. A feeling of fear invaded me. Should I stop? Offer help? Instinctively, I knew I shouldn't. I accelerated, leaving the figure behind. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw that he didn't move, just stood there, watching me leave. I tried to forget the incident and focus on the road. But a few hours later, something even stranger happened. The truck's radio started making a static noise, as if trying to tune into a frequency. Then, I heard a voice, a soft and feminine voice, singing a song I had never heard before. It was a sad melody, almost hypnotic. I tried to change the station, but the radio seemed to have a life of its own. The song continued, getting louder and louder. I stopped the truck on the side of the road to try and fix the radio. That's when I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. My heart was beating fast, and a feeling of paranoia took over me. I started the engine and continued the journey, trying to ignore the growing fear inside me. As the night progressed, the feeling that something was wrong intensified. The road seemed endless, the trees around seemed to close in on me. Then, I saw something ahead on the road. A faint and distant light. As I approached, I realized it was a truck, just like mine, stopped in the middle of the road, with its lights on. I slowed down and stopped next to it. The truck was empty, with no sign of the driver. The driver's door was open, swinging slightly in the wind. There was something unsettling about the way that truck was parked there, as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. I felt an urgency to get out of there, to return to the main road. When I got back to my truck and prepared to leave, I heard a sound. It was a low, almost imperceptible sound coming from the abandoned truck. It was like a whisper, a muffled conversation. I turned off the engine and listened. I couldn't understand the words, but there was something familiar in that voice. Curiosity overcame fear. I got out of my truck and approached the other. The sound seemed to come from the radio. My heart was pounding as I approached the cabin. The radio was on, but the screen was broken, making it impossible to identify the station. The voice continued, a constant murmur, almost like a prayer. Then, something touched my shoulder. I turned in a startle, expecting to find someone behind me, but again, there was no one. The touch was real. I could feel the warmth of a hand on my shoulder. At that moment, a deep terror took hold of me. I ran back to my truck, started the engine, and left as fast as I could. The road ahead seemed to stretch infinitely, and I felt more and more isolated, more detached from reality. The voice on the radio of the abandoned truck still echoed in my mind. I didn't know what it meant or what it wanted, but I felt it was not something good. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I reached the main road. The light of dawn was beginning to appear on the horizon, and with it came a feeling of relief. I had escaped that road, those inexplicable experiences. Since that night, I have never taken that route again. The stories I used to disregard now seem to have a grain of truth. I'm still a truck driver, but I'm more cautious. I avoid unknown roads at night and never stop in isolated places. Sometimes, at night, when I'm driving on dark and lonely roads, I think about that night. About the figures on the side of the road, the strange sounds, the voice on the radio. And I wonder if they are not just the shadows and sounds of the road, but something more, something that lives in the forgotten and silent parts of the world. I always thought that life as a truck driver would be peaceful, an opportunity to see the world through the windshield of a truck. But there was one journey that turned this tranquility into an unforgettable nightmare. It was an autumn night, and I was crossing a stretch known for its beauty during the day, but at night, the road transformed. Surrounded by dense forests, with tight curves and little lighting, it was the kind of place that makes you feel you're not alone. Around midnight, a thick fog began to form, swallowing the road ahead of me. Visibility was nearly zero. I reduced speed, trying to maintain control. That's when I started hearing strange sounds coming from the forest. They were like whispers, distorted voices that seemed to call my name. I tried to ignore them, thinking it was just the wind. But then, something hit the side of my truck. I stopped immediately, my heart racing, and looked in the rearview mirror. There was nothing there, just the empty road shrouded in fog. I continued driving, but the sounds did not cease. They grew louder and clearer, as if several people were hidden in the forest, talking among themselves. Then, I saw something that froze my blood. A human figure, standing in the middle of the road, enveloped in fog. It was impossible to see his face or clothes clearly. Instinctively, I stopped the truck a few meters before the figure. My mind was screaming at me not to get out of the truck, but something inside me wanted to help, in case it was someone lost or in danger. I opened the truck door and got out. The figure remained motionless. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was no response. I approached slowly, and that's when the figure disappeared, as if it had never been there. A sudden panic invaded me. I ran back to the truck, locking the doors. When I looked forward, the road was clear. The fog had disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. I accelerated, wanting to get off that road as quickly as possible. But then, the truck's radio began to make a strange noise. It was a high static, interrupted by distorted voices. They were not voices of a normal broadcast, but screams, laughter, whispers. I turned off the radio, but the voices continued. The rest of the journey was a blur. I remember driving as fast as I could, the trees passing like shadows at the edge of the road. The voices on the radio haunted me, even after I had turned off the device. When I finally reached my destination, the sun was rising. I stopped the truck and got out, still shaking. The silence of the morning was a relief after hours of terror. I never took that road again. The voices, the figure in the fog, all of it became a recurring nightmare. Some fellow truck drivers told me that road had a dark history, full of urban legends and ghost stories. Now, whenever I take the road at night, I avoid isolated places and keep the radio off. I learned the hard way that sometimes roads hide secrets and terrors that go beyond understanding, and that some voices, once heard, never leave us. It was a night like any other in my routine as a truck driver. I always preferred driving at night, finding a strange peace in the solitude of the road. But that night, as I prepared for another journey on Route 17, a path I had traveled countless times, I was far from imagining the horrors that awaited me. Route 17 was known for its long stretches of wilderness and the lack of service stations. I liked this road for the tranquility it offered. But that night, the atmosphere was different. The sky was darker than usual, and a thick fog began to form, swallowing the headlights' glow. I had started my journey around 10 p.m., and the first few hours passed without incident. However, around midnight, I began to notice something strange. The road seemed different, more winding, and the trees around appeared to twist in almost human forms in the shadows cast by the headlights. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fatigue and fertile imagination. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing at the side of the road, a dark and distorted silhouette, as if covered by a cloak. I slowed down, thinking it was someone needing help. But, as I approached, the figure simply disintegrated into a cloud of mist. A shiver ran down my spine. I convinced myself that I was just seeing things due to tiredness and continued driving. The road now seemed to narrow, and the fog grew denser. I could barely see more than a few meters ahead. Then, I began to hear sounds coming from outside the truck. They were whispers, muffled laughter, and occasionally, the sound of footsteps approaching and receding. I turned up the radio volume, trying to ignore the sounds, but they only got louder. Suddenly, a feminine voice echoed through the radio, a voice that didn't belong to any station. She whispered my name, followed by warnings to turn back, to not continue on that road. My heart beat uncontrollably, and a cold sweat covered me. I didn't know what was happening, but something inside me told me not to stop, to keep driving at all costs. Then, the truck's lights began to flicker, and the engine started to fail. I pounded on the steering wheel, desperate to keep the truck moving. The shadows around the road seemed to move, writhing as if they were alive. I could now hear voices, clear and distinct, calling me from the darkness. Fear took hold of me, a primitive fear, and I accelerated, desperate to escape that cursed road. The truck gained speed, and the lights stabilized. The fog began to dissipate, and the voices gradually disappeared. I don't remember how I reached my destination. When the sun began to rise, I was parked at a service station, shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't understand what had happened. Everything seemed so real, so terrifying, but at the same time, it was hard to believe it was not just the fruit of my imagination. In the following weeks, I avoided Route 17. I asked other truck drivers if they had experienced anything similar, but all denied it, some laughing at my story. I began to question my own sanity, wondering if the stress and isolation of the road were affecting my mind. But then, one afternoon, while having coffee at a truck stop, an older man approached me. He had heard my story and said he had experienced something similar many years ago on the same road. He spoke of a local legend, a story of an ancient tragedy that had occurred in that region, where many lost their lives in a truck accident. Since then, I have never driven on Route 17 again. Some roads have secrets, and some of those secrets are better left undiscovered. The road can be a place of freedom and adventure, but it can also be a realm of shadows and unspeakable terrors, where the voices of the past still whisper in the night winds. It was an ordinary night in my routine as a truck driver. After a long day at work, a colleague, Mariana, and I decided to unwind a bit by going to the movies. The day had been tough, and a movie seemed like a good way to relax. She suggested that we stop by her house so she could change clothes. Her house was just a 5-minute drive from our work, so I agreed without hesitation. Upon arriving, we had a quick snack and soon set off. Mariana asked to make a quick stop at a gas station near her house because she wanted to buy an energy drink. It was a station I knew, next to an abandoned car wash. It wasn't a very inviting place, especially at night, but since it was close, I saw no problem. I parked my car next to the car wash, where there was an empty space. The station was somewhat run down, with no lighting at the gas pumps, which made the environment even darker. Mariana got out of the car and went into the station, and I waited, automatically locking the doors for safety. While fiddling with my cell phone, I noticed a glare in the rearview mirror. It was a truck driver with a flashlight, shining it at my car window. I found it strange, but I thought maybe he wanted to ask me something. When he approached, I lowered the window slightly, ready to hear what he had to say. However, the man just stood there, staring at me. After a few uncomfortable seconds, he turned his back and went to the front of the truck. I watched, trying to understand what was happening. I saw him fiddling with something in the cab of the truck, but I couldn't identify what it was. Suddenly, he turned back toward me with something in his hand. I couldn't see what it was, but he seemed agitated. He began approaching my car, speaking loudly, but I couldn't understand his words. My heart raced. I was about to start the car and leave when I saw Mariana coming out of the station. She noticed the situation and began running toward the car. The truck driver, seeing Mariana approaching, quickly returned to his vehicle. In a panic, I started the car and left the station as quickly as I could. Mariana was scared and confused, trying to understand what had happened. As we drove, we discussed what could have motivated the truck driver's behavior. Mariana suggested that maybe he had mistaken me for someone, or worse, that he might have had more sinister intentions. The idea that he might have been planning something dangerous made us even more frightened. In the following days, the experience stayed in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if Mariana hadn't come out of the station at that moment. I decided to be more careful from now on, especially during night stops. This experience made me realize that the road can hide unexpected dangers and that sometimes, even the most common places can turn into scenes of tension and fear. I learned to always be alert and never underestimate the importance of taking precautions, especially when alone at night in unfamiliar places. Since then, whenever I pass a gas station at night, I remember that scary experience and the unsettling look of the truck driver. That night taught me that on the road, one cannot always trust the apparent normality of things and that sometimes reality can be more disturbing than any horror movie. I was on my usual truck driving routine, crossing the country on my solitary journey. That night, I had a special delivery in a region I rarely visited, a place known for its desolate roads and mysterious stories. Accompanying me was Laura, a co-worker who needed a ride to her hometown, which was on the way. After a few hours of travel, Laura suggested we take a break to stretch our legs and grab some coffee. The only nearby place was an old, forgotten gas station next to an abandoned warehouse. The atmosphere of the place was eerily quiet, and the poor lighting only intensified the feeling of isolation. Laura went into the station to buy something to drink, while I stayed in the truck, checking some messages on my cell phone. That's when I noticed a shadowy figure moving towards the truck. It was a man with a worn-out appearance, carrying something that looked like a tool. He approached my window and knocked on the glass. Cautiously, I lowered the window slightly, prepared for any eventuality. He asked if I could help him with a problem with his truck, which was parked behind the warehouse. There was something in his voice that didn't convey trust, but I didn't want to seem rude. Before I could respond, Laura returned, and the man quickly moved away, disappearing into the shadows. Laura commented on how strange he looked, and I agreed, feeling an increasing discomfort. We decided to leave without delay, but as soon as we left the station, I realized something was wrong with the truck. It was making a strange noise, as if something was loose. I pulled over to the side of the road to check, and Laura stayed in the truck. As I was looking under the vehicle, I heard footsteps approaching. It was the same man from the station, now accompanied by another shadowy figure. They were talking among themselves, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew something wasn't right. Quickly, I got back into the truck, locking the doors and alerting Laura. She was pale and frightened. I started the truck and accelerated, leaving the two men behind. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw they were following us in an old, rusty car. I accelerated as much as I could, trying to distance myself from them. Laura was on the phone, trying to call the police, but the coverage was weak, and the call wouldn't go through. The road was deserted, and the only light came from the truck's headlights. After a few tense minutes, their car disappeared from view. Nevertheless, I didn't slow down until we reached a more populated area. When we finally stopped at a safe place, Laura and I shared our relief and concern about what had happened. We decided not to stop at isolated places anymore, especially at night. The experience on that forgotten road taught me to be more cautious and always listen to my intuition. The road can be a lonely and dangerous place, and you never know who or what might be lurking in the shadows. In the following days, Laura and I discussed the incident several times, trying to understand what would have happened if we hadn't left at that moment. We were grateful to have escaped unharmed, but the mystery of that night remained with us. Since then, whenever I pass through less traveled roads, I remember that gas station and the sinister looks of those men, and I wonder what would have happened if fate hadn't been on our side. On a Friday night, after a long shift at work, I decided to hit the road to visit my parents. As a female truck driver, I was accustomed to long solo journeys, but that night would be different from all the others. I had about a 2-hour drive ahead of me, and to keep myself entertained, I put on an upbeat playlist. Driving my father's old truck, I felt at home on the road, even as a 1.6 woman in a male-dominated world. I was in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, singing and having fun with the music when I noticed a huge truck accompanying me in the right lane. Embarrassed at being caught in my moment of relaxation, I stopped singing and dancing and tried to speed up to get out of the other driver's view. To my surprise, he matched my speed. I looked at the driver, expecting to see an annoyed expression, but instead, he was smiling and waving at me. At first, it seemed funny, and I even waved back, but soon I realized I had made a big mistake. The trucker moved to the middle lane, getting even closer to my vehicle. Now he wouldn't stop smiling and waving. I tried to be polite, but I was more focused on getting away from him. I accelerated as much as the truck allowed, reaching 90 miles per hour, and then I abruptly slowed down, trying to shake him off. But he simply matched my speed, regardless of what I did. If someone approached in his lane, he would switch to the right at the last second, blocking my attempt to slow down and putting me in a dangerous position. I realized he was trapping me there, using other vehicles as a barrier. All the time, he maintained a disturbing smile and, for some reason, showed his middle finger. No longer seeing any charm in his behavior, I began to worry and called 911. I described the truck and the driver to them and was advised to pull over to the shoulder, but I didn't feel safe doing so. Taking an opportunity, I managed to move to the rightmost lane and accelerated, trying to leave him behind. The 911 operator advised me to stop at the nearest service station, about 5 miles away, where he probably wouldn't follow me. She said if he did follow me, I should call again, but it probably wouldn't happen. However, he continued with the same strange and frightening behavior, and when I neared the service station, without signaling that I was going to enter, he braked sharply and followed me into the exit. With my heart racing, I called 911 again. The station had a separate parking area for trucks, but he parked his truck and started heading towards where I was. I was locked in the car, with the windows closed, but still, panic took over me. The operator reassured me, saying the police were on their way, but I was desperate. Thinking quickly, I drove to a nearby gas station, hoping to lose the trucker. The 911 operator informed me that the police were on their way, but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I saw the trucker get out of his vehicle and start walking towards me. I was safe inside the car, but the fear was overwhelming. The operator advised me to stay where I was, keeping her updated on the situation. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it was a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. That night completely changed my perception of safety on the road. As a truck driver, I had always felt strong and independent, but at that moment, I felt vulnerable and scared. The police arrived shortly after, and the trucker was questioned. I never knew for sure what his intentions were, but that experience taught me to be even more cautious and alert, especially on night journeys. The road can be a lonely and unpredictable place, and you never know who you might encounter along the way. It was a cold winter night, and I was on the road, returning from a long work trip. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was driving on the highway that cut through the mountainous region. The road was under construction, limited to a single lane with concrete walls on each side, creating a narrow and claustrophobic corridor. In front of me, a large truck dominated the lane. Its imposing presence completely blocked my view ahead, and there was no other vehicle in sight behind me. We were traveling at a steady speed of 70 miles per hour when, suddenly, the truck braked sharply. I managed to stop in time, avoiding a collision. At that moment, I thought there might be some problem ahead that I couldn't see. We resumed the journey, but soon the truck stopped again. This time, I began to suspect that something strange was happening. I moved my car onto the shoulder to try to understand the situation. To my surprise, there was no vehicle in front of the truck. I returned to the lane, and it stopped once more. After a few minutes of this stop and go, The truck began zigzagging between the lanes, as if trying to prevent me from passing. In a moment of tension, I grabbed my cell phone to call 911, but before I could make the call, the truck started moving again. Driving a Volvo V70R, I was accustomed to heavy traffic situations, so I continued alternating between the steering wheel and manual gear shifting. But as I tried to grab my phone again, the truck braked abruptly, causing my phone to fly across the car to the floorboard. Each of my attempts to pass the truck was blocked by it, accelerating and abruptly changing lanes. At one point, I managed to accelerate alongside the truck, but it turned sharply toward me. I slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding a disaster. I was almost colliding with the concrete wall beside me. My heart was racing and adrenaline surged through my body. I was convinced that the driver had malicious intentions. By a hair's breadth, his rear wheels almost hit my car. If I had been a little closer to the truck's cab, I certainly wouldn't be here to tell this story. Finally, when the road opened into 3 lanes, I managed to pass the truck and quickly distance myself. Looking in the rearview mirror, I saw the truck slowing down and disappearing into the night's darkness. That incident left me shaken and reflective. For a long time, I avoided night travel, especially on roads under construction. I learned that on the road, we are not only at the mercy of the road conditions, but also in the hands of other drivers whose intentions can be unpredictable. We have reached the end of our adventure today, venturing into the darkest and most enigmatic corners of human experience. We hope these narratives have stimulated your curiosity and sharpened your imagination. If you felt captivated, remember to share this video with your friends and leave your comment below. We would be delighted to hear your perceptions and theories about these profound mysteries. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and cultivate curiosity. It's always a pleasure to be here with all of you.